My goal as a woodworker is to learn a new skill, technique, or element of design with every new project. A smart man would pick one thing to learn, research it, and go in with a plan. Apparently, I'm not such a smart man. As I embarked on this project, I thought to myself, I've built things with 4 legs, so 3 should be easier. After all, it's 1 less leg. It'll be so easy. I'll make it out of scrap material I have lying around the shop. And I should just be able to wing it. It'll be simple.
You sure about that?
Did the project turn out in the end? Stick around, and you can tell me what you think. What I'm making is a side table to replace a small bookshelf in my living room. Recently, we picked up a set of couches from Facebook Marketplace, which turned out to be a little bit larger than the old ones. So the shelf had to go, and a new challenge was born: to build a side table with a round top and tapered legs. Why a round top? Because I'd never done one before. The theme of this project, apparently. Why tapered legs? You guessed it, I'd never done them before. I'll get back to my story in just a second, but I guess I should kind of tell you what's happening here. I've milled up some scrap walnut. Yes, I know, I was fortunate enough to have a little bit of scrap walnut. And while that's getting glued together, I decided I needed to make a circle cutting jig for the bandsaw. I'm just making a runner that sits in the miter slot of the bandsaw. I've elevated it a little bit and have a piece that I've already cut a slot into for the blade that I'm going to set down on top. And the CA glue is going to provide the initial clamping force to stick that runner together onto the board until the tight bond quick and thick is able to cure and harden up. And then, knowing the radius that I wanted for the circle I was going to be cutting, I measured that from the outside of the blade and hammered in a nail, which I then cut the head off of. I was able to drill a small hole into the underside of my piece of walnut, nice and centered, and set the nail that I placed into that hole and turned on the bandsaw. And as you can see here, this was remarkably easy. I definitely need to swap out from my resaw blade when I do this to a smaller blade, like a 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch blade or something like that for these tighter radii, especially for the circles that I'll cut later. Then it was over to the drum sander that I recently purchased off of Facebook Marketplace, and I have to say, if you have a drum sander, the Mirka Abranet rolls are absolutely amazing. They don't technically fit this drum sander, so I had to cut things down to size, but wow, night and day difference between that type of sandpaper and the stuff that usually is used in drum sanders. Cleaned up the edges on my belt sander and then put a small chamfer on the top and a larger one on the bottom before moving on to the legs. Honestly, the picture in my head had 4 legs, but the matching 8/4 or 2-inch thick material I had on hand was only enough for 3 legs, but I figured that's okay because 3 is 1 less than 4, so 25% less trouble. Or so I thought. As it turns out, 3-legged tables have a few issues. The first of which was, with the round top, a 3-legged table sure looks a lot like a stool, and I wasn't making a stool. Secondly, 3-legged tables seem to always look like the top is off-center from one or more angles. No matter what I did, I could not make it look the way that I wanted it to. And thirdly, I really wasn't a fan of how the legs looked when set near the outside of the tabletop. And when they were towards the center of the tabletop, it still didn't look right. This was when I shifted my on-the-fly design to have 3 tapered legs that were set at an angle out from the center of the table. You know the problem with that? Mocking it up is a lot like playing Jenga. If you move one piece wrong, the whole thing topples. That night, I went to bed frustrated and unsure how I was going to bring all these elements together and attach the top and the legs. I also realized that I would want a lower shelf between these angled legs, which I had no idea how to make work. So this is what I came up with. I marked out the leg positions on a small piece of wood, countersunk and drilled some holes for the top of the legs, and then screwed them together into it. This certainly turned out to be a little bit of a balancing act, but Hey, you know what? So far, so good. While I'm doing this, don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying the process. And if you want to see more projects like this, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep creating together. I couldn't believe how simple and low-tech this leg mounting solution ended up being. It goes to show you that you don't always have to go with some fancy technique you saw on that big creator's channel to solve a problem. Sometimes what works the best is also the simplest, like a single flat piece of wood. Starting to get somewhere. Then I drilled oversized holes through my leg mounting piece and screwed through it into the tabletop. The oversized holes will allow the screws to move slightly if there's any wood movement on the tabletop. I cut another round piece for the lower shelf, put a bevel on it, and marked for dowels. Now, I'm not sure if there's a better way to attach this than what I did, but if you've got an idea or even better experience building something like this, let me know in the comments. I want to create a community of creative and resourceful people who can support one another and share solutions. On that note of community, did you know that I now have a woodworking community through YouTube memberships? It gives you all kinds of perks, and so I'd encourage you to go and check that out when you can. It helps out the channel and hopefully will help you learn and grow as a woodworker as well. Once I had the lower shelf in place, the leg splay angle had been set permanently, so I marked a line parallel to the workbench around each leg bottom and used my Japanese pole saw to score the line all the way around before cutting the angles and then cleaned them up with a block plane. From there, I needed to fix an issue with my leg mounting solution. As I looked at the table, it became very clear that the leg mount was noticeable and quite blocky underneath the tabletop. Thankfully, the solution was really easy. I just cut around the leg markings I'd made earlier at the bandsaw to make a more rounded appearance to the mounting plate, and then gave it a heavy bevel to make it visually blend up into the top. The table saw had left a lot of cutting and burn marks on the table legs, so I took them apart and used my low-angled jack plane to clean them up on each side, using the wedge pieces left over from cutting the tapers. And this kind of thing is one reason why it's so important to save all of your offcuts until a project is complete. I know it sometimes seems like you'll never need that little piece or that thing that you cut off from another piece of wood, but you really never do know when that piece of garbage will actually come in really handy and save the day. And as a woodworker, isn't using up the leftovers what a scrap wood project is actually all about? It's the ever-present challenge we face. When we first start woodworking, materials are in short supply and every chunk of pine, plywood, or hardwood is a precious commodity. But soon our shops begin to fill up with all the offcuts we've been telling ourselves we'll use someday, and if we're not intentional about trying to use them in our shop projects or other woodworking builds, they actually overwhelm us instead of helping. The challenge here is where to draw the line, and I think the answer will be different for each of us. But I also think this project goes to show that 2 small leftovers of some walnut and cherry can be turned into something both functional and beautiful. And that's true of people too. It's easy to write ourselves off because we're not as impressive as the next person, at least in our minds, but each of us has a role to play, and you and I can make a difference in the lives of those around us through simple things like our kindness and generosity. This project shows that scrap wood can be valuable, but the value of that scrap wood pales in comparison to the value every single one of us has in God's eyes. Friends, until next time, make sawdust, not excuses.